Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 200. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. Today's a compilation episode where we look back at the past 8 years and 200 episodes. Enjoy this trip down memory lane with ArchaeoTech. Let's get to it.
You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 1. On today's show, Doug and Russell talk to Stu Eve of LP Archaeology. Visit the show's website at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Archaeotech. Now, on to the show.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here with Russell.
Hi, everybody.
And we are talking with Stu Eve, who is from LP Archaeology, and he's going to be talking to us about ARC. Just to kick this off, Stu, can you tell us what ARC is?
Sure. Well, ARC stands for the Archaeological Recording Kit. So I guess at its heart, it's really a database system which has a web-based front end which allows archaeologists to record information. I suppose that's the sort of succinct there is actually quite an important thing.
And have you had people take ARC, modify it, make plugins or anything, or put back into it?
We haven't directly had that in terms of people saying, I've got a piece of code that I want to commit back, but we have had a lot of projects where they've said, hey, we want this particular thing, and we've had a go at coding it, and then we would come in and basically take that code and just clean it up a little bit before we put it back in. There's been a few and have fun. That's the main thing.
I take it when you guys were learning to code, you had a goal in mind, or was this completely just play? You decided you kind of wanted to play around with this stuff and then eventually start developing stuff like ARC? Or did you, when you started learning, did you say, all right, we need to do this database platform, and what do we need to learn? How was that process?
So, if you want the honest answer, yes. I did some stuff on Access back in the day, and then we got a server, and we thought, oh, well, what would be great is if we could do this on the web, because then we would be able to share this stuff with everyone, and all the collaborators on the project could log in, and it would be cool. How do we do that? We kind of looked around a bit at some stuff, started just typing some HTML, and then guy kind of came up one day and said, I found this thing called PHP. I've been playing around with it. What do you think? And I had a look and I was like, oh, okay, that sounds quite cool. And that was basically it. Completely no planning whatsoever. Just went from there, and which is why it's taken 14 years to get to where it is.
Wow. So
going basically.
So you kind of run a bit like Red Hat, and so for listeners who might not know, Red Hat is sort of a development, or Ubuntu, which are Linux, so similar to Windows or Mac, but they're basically companies that give away all their software for free, but then charge for development or sort of other services. So that's somewhat similar to how you guys run. Is that correct?
That's exactly right, yeah. So, I mean, basically, you should be able to download it and just use it if you've got someone who knows how to install things on a server, basically. I'm not saying that anyone can do it. You do need someone who knows how to install Apache and install MySQL, which is very easy to follow the instructions to do that. Yeah, and then if you've got something a bit more fancy you want, I mean, there's lots of documentation online about ARC. There's a how-to guides, and there's how to do this, how to fill in these particular things, how to configure these files and everything. But if you want to do something beyond that, or if you're not really completely tech savvy, then we can come and help, basically. And that you can choose to buy as much or as little of that as you want.
Brilliant. Well, with that, I think we'll probably end this part of the podcast. Stuart, thank you for being on. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome.
And great to hear about ARC.
Hello, and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast. I'm your host, Russell Eileen Willems. Today on the show, my co-host Doug Rocks McQueen and I will talk with Lorna Richardson, a digital public archaeologist from the United Kingdom, about her research and work with outreach projects like the Day of Archaeology blogging event and much, much more.
My background originally for my undergraduate degree many, many years ago, bearing in mind I'm very old, was in archaeology. I then went into community work in the charitable sector. Never touched or was interested in computers whatsoever until the mid-2000s, and started to get into website stuff then. But it was only when I started working for LP Archaeology, who are a digitally focused commercial archaeological organisation in East London, that I actually got completely and utterly obsessed by public archaeology and the internet, really. So I'm looking at public archaeology being a huge, all-embracing umbrella term for how archaeologists communicate with the public by whatever means. So looking at public archaeology in the UK specifically, and within that, my research focused on 4 sort of broad brush organisational areas where archaeologists communicate online with the public, the amorphous general public, in universities, HLF projects. So I was looking at these 4 areas, so looking at community archaeology groups, universities, commercial archaeology organisations, and HLF projects, and looking at the sort of formats of communications that they were using and sharing online, why they were doing it, how they were doing it, and then looking at more nuanced things that they were doing, like were organisations subject to social media use policies within their organisations? Did this prevent them communicating with the public any information about the work that they were doing? Looking at concepts of things like archaeological expertise and how that's presented online, looking at how you would promote yourself as an archaeologist and how the anonymity of the internet supplies identity or not for you as a professional archaeologist, and how you can up or down that, and how that works with the concept of authority and archaeological authority. I looked at crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, how we were using internet technologies to do things like the Day of Archaeology, so looking at large crowdsourced projects.
Welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, Episode 8 for January 29, 2014. I'm your host, Russell Allen Willems. Today on the show, Chris Webster and I talk with Chris Cameron of Field Technologies Incorporated.
Hi, good to be here.
Hey, me too. Good to be here.
We're a technology company. We were founded by archaeologists for archaeologists. We provide technical solutions to situations in the field. And the whole idea is to let archaeologists do more digging and less paperwork. Our main product is a phase 1 shovel testing app called ArchaeoGen. Basically what it does is it replaces your shovel test form on the front end. It's really designed to be productivity neutral in the field, though we have had positive feedback from people so far. And the real value is on the back end, because all of your data will be compiled together from everybody. You get nightly updates, and all of your data comes in a spreadsheet format in Excel, which means that it's searchable, sortable, whatever. But Excel also plays really well with other software, so you can import it to ArcGIS, or just plop it into Google Maps, whatever you feel like.
You're kind of using the digital advantage to remove kind of the transcription backend that a lot of us have to do when we get back from the field with, a big sheaf of grubby shovel test forms.
Yes.
So Chris, I had a question for you about a little bit of the design process with your application. Is this something that you went and just kind of said, what's my dream application being an archaeologist out in the field? Or did you test it out with users? Have you gotten feedback on people using it across the different places you've sold the app to?
I and another guy who had originally been in archaeology, but then ended up going back to graduate school for database management, was my original co-founder. He unfortunately decided to go a different way, so we have a different pool of ownership now. But the original idea was, some years ago when we had worked together, we had said this would be great if we had back then a PDA or whatnot. This was back in the days before tablets.
Good old Palm Pilot.
Yeah. Oh yeah, man.
One around here somewhere.
Yeah, maybe in a museum. The technology caught up, and the fact that the GPS in the Apple products, because it uses both GLONASS, which is the Russian constellation of satellites, and the US GPS satellites, which Android devices don't. It's one of the reasons we went Apple. Well, there were a number of reasons why we went iOS only. That was one of them, is that it meant that we have a GPS that we can consistently get 5-meter accuracy, sometimes 10 under bad cover. Though with ArchaeoGen, every single point, every single shovel test has its own accuracy, horizontal accuracy. So if you get 7 points that are out in Timbuktu and the rest aren't, you can determine if the person dug in the wrong place or if it was bad data. If you get trash data, we want you to know. So that's one of the fail-safes we put in. Another reason we use iOS, it's encrypted on the device. The NSA was recently not very happy about that. We do secure connection to our server, which is secure, and then we use an encrypted file encryption for getting the data to our clients. So at every step of the way.
Hello and welcome to episode 13 of the ArchaeoTech Podcast, iPads in the Field. I'm your host, Chris Webster. We're going to talk about using iPads in the hot northern Mojave Desert on an actual project with the people that are using them. They've never used them this way, and they've never used the software we're going to talk about either. It's a candid discussion of the technology and where it's going right and where it can improve. Let's get to the show. We're using Apple iPad Mini 3s with the Retina display and fingerprint security that should help identify the model. They're in a life-proof case, and the app or apps that we're using for site recording and for forms, using an app called Tapforms for iOS. It's only available for iOS. The nice thing is you can create template forms, which I have stored on my computer, and I can just send those via email or message or whatever to the tablet, and then click on that, and it opens in Tapforms and creates everything. So it's kind of amazing that way. I'm also using, the other guys aren't so much, an app called iAnnotate, and I've got all my project maps. We've got a 30,000 acre project, and all of the little parcels are split up into 1 by 1 mile sections. And so each one of those, I've got overview maps, and then I've got a little section map for each different section that we're in that shows our particular project area for that section. So I'm using that like normally crew chiefs would write on their maps with pencils and things like that. And every few days, out here, it'd probably be every few hours, you'd sweat through that map and have to get another one. Yeah. So yeah, this is an advantage, definitely having that, so I can draw on it and do all of my transects and stuff like that.
Well, one of the biggest issues is because, and I mean, this isn't going to be the case everywhere you walk in the United States, but out here where it's like 110 degrees, like it overheats as you're standing in the sun, and you got to actually worry pretty heavily about your shade and how you keep it out of the sun, because the thing would just shut down and you're in the middle of a form. You're like, okay, awesome. Back to paper, Chris. No.
Any tablet with a glass screen is going to overheat quickly in just about any amount of sunlight, regardless of the ambient temperature. It doesn't help if it's 110 degrees out, but even just sunlight on the glass at 85 degrees, it'll eventually overheat because of the way UV radiation interacts with the glass. Exactly. So
one of the things, though, is like when a new technology, I don't see it as something that's going to replace every piece of paper. I mean, because I think I kind of see like a middle ground on this perspective in the way, because like just even sitting at this coffee table here, Chris's, I see like, 6 books in front of me, and it's not like digital information gets rid of every, piece of paper that exists or the old form of technology. I mean, like just the way that like, we all have MP3 players, but sometimes we still get CDs and put them in a CD player, and though they phase out, well, you're an early adapter, but I mean, it's going to be a slow process.
Well, let's go down to somewhat of the convenience too. Andrew was a big skeptic of the tablet early on, and I saw him just last week. Finally, did you stop carrying your massive binder?
I had a beautiful little file box. Really, it was a clipboard that had a file box attached to it, and I'd had that all set up with little tabs for every single form. And it was a great system, and I've learned it and kind of developed it over the years of doing this, and it was a system that worked really, really well for me. And I was skeptical for a few days that we actually would never carry paper into the field, and I carried this 5-pound object with me for a good week,
stubbornness.
And finally gave it up, which and when you think about that, there's less weight you have to carry with you. There's
more water you can carry with you.
More water you can carry, or
more Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
More cereal. I think that's a bigger conversation.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Welcome to episode 16 of the ArchaeoTech Podcast for November 2nd, 2015. And I'll be joined by a new co-host, Chris Sims. We're resurrecting this show from the dead just days after Halloween, and we're kicking it off with a gear review show. Let's get to the show. We've got Chris Sims.
Yep, I'm also the one of the co-hosts of a forthcoming podcast called the Go Dig a Hole Podcast. You can also check it out on our blog, godigahole.com.
Field power is the first thing we're going to discuss. For this first one, I don't know if you're going to want to go and buy it or not. It's the Zag Spark, and it's Zagg SPARQ. I think they took a page out of IKEA's handbook there. Anyway, it's the Zag Spark 6000. 6000 stands for 6,000 milliamps, and let's talk about milliamps real quick. Think of milliamps as the size of the gas tank in your car. Okay. That being said, the reason I hate this battery, it's my very first field battery, my very first external battery that I had. It's got good ports on it. They work well. I always forgot to shut it off, which was irritating. I like the newer ones that just shut off automatically and they turn on when you plug them in. But the biggest thing I hate about this is the flip out plugs. And if you look at the website, go to our show notes page and look at the picture of it. They're so ridiculous. They don't work. You try to plug this into the wall and the charging lights never light up. And then you have to set it down on a power strip and then put some weight on it and put some other stuff on it, or find a nice tight plug that it'll take, because the contacts inside just never work.
Yeah, so Shutterfly, I don't know how important it is for you to customize an external battery pack, but as a caveat, my mom got this for me because she was tired of me getting back from international trips and giving her a quick phone call and saying, "Hey Mom, I'm back in the States, I'm alive, I still have 8 hours to go before I'm home. My phone's about to die. That's all I have time up. But phone's dead. Gotta go." So she got me this battery pack that has a picture of me and my lovely partner, Andy. So
it's disgusting.
He means adorable. But you could go to Shutterfly and get probably this same picture on your battery pack.
iMac, take us out with a binary solo. All right, we're back, and after a sip of brandy and Benedictine, which I highly recommend in the cold fall days.
This last segment of the show, we'll be covering our favorite apps. So I'll go ahead and get this one started off with an app that I've used in the field and in my everyday life. It's really changed the way I deal with weather, which is one of our, constantly changing variables. This thing's called RadarCast Elite, and it's available on the iTunes store, the App Store, for $3, $2.99. It is the most hands down accurate weather you can possibly get your hands on. It'll make Weather Underground and the weather.com apps just look like total garbage.
I'm going to talk about one that I use a lot. It has radar and stuff, but really what I use it for is the push notifications. And this is called Dark Sky, because it knows where you're at, and it will give me a push notification on my watch and on my phone that says rain starting soon or drizzle starting soon. Nice. It'll even tell me that it's ended. If I'm sitting in the house and I want to know. Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 24. Today I interview Michael Ashley of the Center for Digital Archaeology, and we talk all things digital site recording. Episode 24 is featuring Mr. Michael Ashley, co-founder of the Center for Digital Archaeology. Michael, how's it going?
It's going really well. We started the Center for Digital Archaeology back in 2011. We specifically were trying to help all of us who are in the realm of archaeology and CRM and culture heritage take good advantage of digital tools. The core things that we have been doing over the past 5 years have been about actually developing technologies, specifically a content management system that's open source called Mukudu CMS, which principally helps indigenous communities save, preserve, and share their digital culture and heritage. And we have a web service that helps with that. And something called Codify, which is our paperless collection, curate, and web platform.
Doing surveys. Why do I need to get some big complicated database? Why do I need to collect my data any differently than I've been doing it for the last 40 years? What's the big deal? I'm an archaeologist. Why do I need to do that?
So if we all think about the kinds of archaeology we do worldwide, so not to just focus on CRM. So let's talk about, quote unquote, as I say, academic archaeology or research-based archaeology. The main job that I do, Chris, all the time is what we have now lovingly called data therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So data therapy is we sit down and people say, okay, well, this is what this is what we've been doing for 5 years, 50 years, literally 150 years. Back in when Chicago was digging a site in, say, Israel.
Yeah.
This is what we've been doing forever. And we're still trying to find records that were done at the turn of the century to turn that into knowledge now in 2017, say. That's the idea. What we want to be able to do is have everything that's ever been said about this site, not just the site, because the site boundaries change over time, but the area, the place, the survey, ceramics, human remains, whatever it might be, at our fingertips in real time so that we can actually make better decisions in the field and we can tell better stories down the line.
Okay, I'm here with the, I think, first ever live interview for the ArchaeoTech podcast, aside from some small conference stuff we've done. And I'm here with Peter Wigand.
As a kid, I used to look for arrowheads. Interest developed into wanting to go do it as a career potentially. I went up to the University of Washington as a undergraduate and started out in anthropology. I was going to do Middle Eastern archaeology. The person who was teaching Middle Eastern archaeology actually left, and I ended up doing Mesoamerican archaeology.
I have a feeling that a lot of CRM archaeologists in particular might think that pollen analysis is simply just counting things and determining what plants were there. But there's a lot that you can tell from exactly what plants were there at a certain level and certain quantities and things like that. So in that respect, tell us about some of the work you've done in Italy.
Italian work I started was about 5 years ago. I was invited by one of my graduate students to join a group of Canadian and British archaeologists in southern Italy who were doing work on a Augustan villa, believe it or not, that was owned by a slave, one of his slaves during the lifetime of the slave, and then reverted back to Augustus after the death of the slave. What's fascinating about this area is that it's always been a crossover area between many cultures. 2,500 years ago, as the Iron Age peoples were moving south into the heel and toe of Italy, we had Oscans, who were Italic-speaking peoples coming down the coast in the west, and then we had people coming across from the Balkans who were Albanian speakers, pollen preservation there. But I thought it would be really nice to put the villa into a regional pollen context, in a vegetation context, because we're talking about an area that some people have suggested the region was infallible, in other words, that had it been abandoned, the agricultural lands. Other people say no, it hadn't been, and so forth. So we were interested in trying to decide what was going on in the region. We were looking at the correlation that we found between the alluvial record and the erosion model that I've done with climate, and the fact that we could actually put human impact into the model as well by doing a GIS overlay of this archaeological survey data within the region, showing where people were living and what they were doing, and literally putting that, superimposing that on the geology. And when people moved into sensitive areas off of areas that are resistant, then what we can show is that there's an increase in the erosion rate as well. So we can use that as sort of a transfer function to, let's say, make the model more precise to predict erosion rates.
Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 42. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Chris Sims. On today's show, we get into the annual holiday episode and talk about gifts for archaeologists.
But then they've got like the Suunto MC2G compass, which is an orienteering compass. It's awesome, but it's $100 at REI. And I was like, trusty standby Silva Ranger, that's like $35. The books, the ebooks and stuff like that.
Well, first off, you get a certain number of ebooks from Amazon. I think it's probably like one a month or something. And they had a display for a thing called the Chill Out Buddy. Honestly, they look like huge hot dog buns, but they're these, that's what they look like.
Definitely, like gift cards are always a good idea. Things like hammocks are usually popular, but then also there's like camping equipment, especially like cook sets are super useful. I've had a cook set, it's from Snow Peak. It's titanium, so it's super lightweight, incredibly strong.
You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Thanks for supporting us.
Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 56. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my special co-host today, Richie Cruz. On today's show, we talk about the Apple Worldwide Developers Conference and what it means or what it doesn't mean for archaeology. Let's get to it. Richie's a longtime field tech, worked all over the country, a lot in the West here. He worked with me a couple of years ago in California. We're recording this on Friday, June 9th.
I think that's part of the problem with Apple, though. I feel like in the olden days, they used to be known as like if you were a graphic artist or a video editor, but now you can do that on any computer.
What we're looking at here is what's the easiest, simplest solution for a CRM firm of any size to set up. I'd rather buy something right out of the gate that doesn't need a lot of maintenance for a number of years, just works, and take that money and spend it on something else. To bring it back to WWDC, but they showed augmented reality. There was a big table sitting on the stage, and then they were using an iPad Pro with a new chip in it that you can buy now today. I've got an iPad Pro 12.1 inch, but it doesn't have the brand new chip in it.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 58. On today's show, I talk to the creators of WildNote, a form generation and field data collecting application. Let's get to it. Kristen Hazard and Nancy Douglas. Welcome to the show.
So my name's Kristen Hazard. I'm the founder and CEO of WildNote. And WildNote came out of my work at an environmental consulting firm, actually. Probably about 5-6 years ago, I had started a software consulting company and at the same time became a principal in a small environmental consulting company. So I was kind of doing two things. Through that, I actually ended up building a similar app for PG&E for all of their compliance reporting. So my background is really varied. I have a mechanical engineering degree from Cal Poly. And then from there, I got a law degree.
Nice.
And then as I was waiting for my bar results, I got hired to be a programmer.
All right. Well, Nancy, what's your story?
What's my story? Well, it's nowhere near as exciting as Kristen's story. So what I bring to the table for Kristen, I'm the sales director for WildNote, and I love connecting with people and learning about what they're doing. And I'm just always interested in learning something new.
Yeah, and between hiking, drinking, and report writing, it's hard for archaeologists to get anything else done. So, what's your grand vision for this?
We'd like to revolutionize environmental compliance, monitoring, and reporting, basically. That's the big picture. And what we see is a lot of these paper-based processes. So paper out in the field, then bring it into Word, and then maybe turn it into PDF, and then maybe email it to the appropriate stakeholders. All of it sort of, whether it's digital paper or real paper, these inefficient paper-based processes. And we see that, wow, we could go electronic from beginning to end, right? So digital field data collection, back at the office, editing through the web app, it's still in a relational database and easy to edit and easy to have everything in one place. And then eventually exporting to these various agencies and stakeholders electronically as well, creating massive efficiencies, less hassle, headache, that sort of thing, and hopefully saving everybody money, which everybody can get behind environmental compliance being more efficient and less expensive.
Feel free to go onto wildnoteapp.com and try it out. We would love to welcome you into the WildNote family and to get your feedback on how we can make this the very best tool for this particular group.
Welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, the show where archaeology and technology come together. This is episode 61, and I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. Wait, what? Who the hell is Paul Zimmerman? Find out on today's episode. We'll also talk about recent updates to Apple Maps and the note-taking app Notability in the App of the Day segment. Let's get to it. Okay, welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast. We've got a new co-host today. Paul, how's it going?
That's pretty good. How you doing?
Good. First off, how long have you been listening to the ArchaeoTech Podcast?
I've been listening to it for about a year and a half, I think, as well as some of the other APN podcasts, but that's the one that I really gravitated to.
What brings you to this field?
Let's say that I'm an interested amateur, but I'm an amateur with a PhD in the field. What I mean is I met up with one of my old buddies that I used to do field work with last Christmas time, and he described himself as an ex-archaeologist, and I thought, I can't quite call myself that anymore. The X part didn't sit right with me.
You mentioned that when you were doing archaeology, that you were kind of on the tech side of things. What was tech like, 17 years ago when you were working in archaeology? Like, what kind of stuff were you working with on that side?
The main project that we had was at Masca. Bill Fitz and he's a European archaeologist. He and I were in charge of programming something that we called Sitemap, and it was a suite of programs that we used for surveying with total stations. Bill was on the data collection side of it, and I was on the data plotting side of it. So we had, laptops, PowerBooks at the time, I think, that we would run Minicad, then Vectorworks for the plotting, custom program that we wrote on Corvallis MC5 data collectors. Mm-hmm. And basically we'd set up with these total stations and map in entire sites or map in objects found in trenches or whatever was necessary for the given site.
On today's show, we explore the possibility of remote working in contract archaeology. Believe me, it's possible. So dump the office and let's get to it.
Because I do a lot of network admin, I have to frequently stay up late at night when something goes kablooey and remote in and do my work on our servers as if I were physically at the space, but when I'm actually sitting up in the living room.
The first question you have to ask yourself when you're thinking about telecommuting, or you're thinking about if you're an office manager, you're running the office or running the company, and you're thinking about setting this up for your employees, is can you do it? And can everybody do it? The thing I think about is, what are the physical things I need to interact with at the office that would cause me to be at the office, right? Episode 94. Today we discuss chatbots as agents of cultural outreach.
So, Dr. Gonzalez-Tennant, thanks for coming on ArcPod. Jeez. ArcPod, I'm reading my name instead of... Okay. Episode 104, I get the joy of interviewing Dr. Edward Gonzalez-Tennant.
Episode 108. Today we talk to Simon Young of Lithodomos VR. Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 113. Today we talk to Zach Beyer about his work in Jamaican archaeology. Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 124. Today we discuss working remotely and the impacts of the coronavirus and the impending zombie apocalypse on archaeology. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 130. Today we talk computational archaeology with Dr. Isaac Eula. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 132. Today we discuss incorporating archaeology into gaming with guest Amanda Gomez. Let's get to it.
Hi there. Welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 149. This is your host this episode, Paul Zimmerman, and today we have a special guest co-host, Eric Olson. We're going to drive this right off the tracks, I'm sure. But today's conversation, if you're a regular listener, this is episode 149. The previous episode, 148, Eric was our guest. How do you deal with actually starting on tech? Because so many of the different tech kind of projects that you see, what you see is something that somebody has gotten to a certain point at that they're very adept at. And so that barrier to entry, you look at it and you think, oh, I could never do that. And it's daunting.
I'm just thinking about technology and how we can get people to be less scared of it and more willing to learn how cool and efficient it can make your workflow and make research better.
Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 168. Today we discuss Paul's recent trip to Iraq and his experiences doing drone photogrammetry while he was there. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 171. Today we discuss archaeological radiography with James Elliott. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 172. Today we talk to Dr. Cora Woolsey, the founder of Archaeosoft and creator of the field data collection application Stratum. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 175. Paul's in Iraq, so today I talk to Brian Fritz, inventor of a mechanized archaeological digging machine called PaleoDigger. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 181. Today we discuss the gamification of education with J.D. Calvelli. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 183. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my temporary co-host, Edward Gonzalez-Tennant. Today we talk about what Ed's been up to lately and where he's going next fall. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 186. Today I bring on a guest to talk about field safety tech. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 197. Today we talk to Chelsea Colwell-Posh about a mechanical auger for archaeological perspection that she invented. Let's get to it. All right, Chelsea, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Chris and Paul. I am so excited to be here.
I expect you to say long-time listener, first-time interviewee, just because, you know.
Absolutely. I am just fangirling here and really excited to be here. I listen to you guys all the time. I have a commercialized apparatus that uses an encased auger using Archimedes screw that I apply for archaeological prospection, for probabilistic sampling, or test pitting on a grid. Table. So if the sediments are deeper than 1.2 meters, I can't convert that for you. I am so sorry. I am metric all the way. But
that's 11 feet.
That's 11 feet. If we can't, I don't think it's 11 feet.
You're right. It's not 11 feet. Wow. It's 3 feet 11 inches. I didn't read the whole thing. Yeah, 3 feet.
It's almost 4 feet. So really deep. Consistent. That's another wonderful thing about this is every test pit is literally the same size. Every test pit. There's not going to be a variation between, Jimmy and Bob, who dig 50 centimeter test pits, but Bob's is 55 and Jimmy's is 37. But, we're going to get a really consistent probabilistic sampling grid.
Or the shapes where one's a bathtub and one's a point, right? Some people can dig good holes and some people can't.
That's right. And you always have that one tech that just takes so much pride in their work that you could literally, put their test pit on the cover of your report. And then there's the other guys who are just like you don't know if they were trying to bury a body over the weekend or like. Right.
Thanks for listening to the ArchaeoTech Podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.archpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at archpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.